The guillotine was used thousands of times during the Second World War in Germany to take the heads of those who opposed Hitler and the Nazis. Anyone who spoke out against the Third Reich and the regime was likely to be executed, and during the war there were many different people from different walks of life who inside of Nazi prisons were sent to the guillotine. It was ruling by fear and ensuring that there was no dissent. The crime that many lost their heads for was defeatism, which the Nazis believed would harm the war effort. But there were 3 Catholic priests and a Lutheran pastor who on the same day in November 1943, and within 3 minutes from each other, would all be executed on the guillotine inside of a prison in Hamburg. But what is the story of the executions of the priests guillotined by Hitler? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Catholic priests who were executed became known as the Lubeck martyrs. They all worked at the Sacred Heart Church there. One was a chaplain, another was a rector, and the third was a vicar. Karl Friedrich Stellbrink was a Lutheran priest, and he was the pastor of the city's Lutheran church. The 4 men had been very close friends, and they would exchange ideas and beliefs, and they shared sermons amongst each other. Stellbrink was the son of a customs official, and he served in the First World War until he was injured with a bad wound on his hand. He then became ordained as a priest, and in the early days he was to begin with swept up in the Nazi beliefs and causes, and he was initially a supporter of Hitler. But then he realised that it was horrific, and was not in teaching with the Christian beliefs, and was steeped in persecution. He would be taken in front of a Nazi Party investigation board when he refused to break off his friendships that he had with Jews. But in 1937 he would quit the Nazis altogether. Johannes Prasser was another man involved, and he was a Catholic priest, but one who came to the priesthood in 1937. Father Prasek worked at the Herz Jesuit Church with Müller and Langer, and he would, during his preaching, warn soldiers and youngsters against the Nazi beliefs and the anti-Semitism which was occurring across the nation. He would also speak out against the executions of prisoners and Jews, and during this time under German law, words such as these were considered treasonous, and they were subjected to the death penalty if he was reported to the SS or the Gestapo. Father Prasek would also learn Polish, so he could speak to Polish workers who were forced to work in the region around his church, and this was also illegal, as it was portrayed that he was sympathetic to the enemies of the Nazis. Eduard Müller also worked at the church, and he grew up destitute and very poor. He would work as a joiner before he studied in the priesthood, and he became a Catholic priest in 1940. He worked also at the same church and would help with youngsters, and he was a very popular man. However, he would speak to them about the dangers of the Nazis, but he had a special relationship with the people he worked with, and the discussions he had with the youngsters were also treasonous in the eyes of the Nazis. Hermann Langer was a preacher who would tell young soldiers that participating in a war was strongly against Christianity. He would write a letter from prison later saying about his sufferings, and he would say he was suffering like those who were in history, and he believed he was one of those who was being persecuted like many Christians had before. He said the common sufferings of the past few years have brought about a rapprochement of the Catholic and Lutheran Church. The imprisonment of the Catholic and Protestant clergy is a symbol of both their joint suffering and of rapprochement. With this, Langer stated that the 2 churches who in the past had been at war with each other in the centuries before were now uniting against the threat of Hitler and the Nazis. So these 4 men who were involved in speaking out against Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. On the 29th of March 1942, Stellbrink said that in the misery of our home city, we hear God's voice, and some interpreted this that God's judgment on the city was made with the effects of a British air raid on Lubeck that had happened the night before. During this raid, over 300 people were killed, and at the time in the war, this was the worst civilian casualties listed in an Allied bombing raid that had ever been carried out in Germany. Because of this, people believed that Stellbrink was preaching defeatism, that he was saying that God was against the Nazis, and that the judgment against the Nazis was the British bombers raining down. Because of this, Stellbrink was then arrested a week later, on the 7th of April 1942, and the arrest continued as the Gestapo looked into the activities of the church. Prasek was arrested on the 18th of May, then Langer was arrested on the 15th of June, along with Muller a week later on the 22nd of June. These 4 clerics were taken into interrogation, as were 18 other people who attended the church, and they were also questioned heavily. The priests would be held for almost a year. Then on the 22nd of June 1943, the trial of the 4 men occurred inside of the second chamber of the People's Court. Overseeing the case was Judge Wilhelm Kroner, and he had been sent to Lubeck for this trial specially. Joseph Goebbels had instructed the judges of the People's Court that they must base their decisions less on law and more on the basic idea that the lawbreakers be removed from the national community. After the 2-day hearing had taken place, the 4 men were sentenced to death for broadcasting crime and listening to enemy broadcasts. They were also condemned for treasonous support for the enemy and demoralisation of the armed forces. Some of the attendants of the church were given long sentences in prison, and the trial became infamous for the persecution of the Christians of Lubeck. The 4 priests were, following their death sentence, transferred to Hamburg's Holstein-Glasses prison, and this at the time had become a regional hub for executions in 1936 under the Nazi rule. Later a guillotine was permanently added, which remained in the prison at all times. The priests asked for clemency, but this was rejected, and no support was offered to them at all. Stellbrink was even ousted from his position as a priest for his conviction. But the device which would take the heads off the priests was the German guillotine, or the Fallbeil. This was a guillotine which was made from metal, and across Germany there were a number of executioners who had become rather skilled with the guillotine and device. They had perfected the execution method using the device to the point where they could execute someone in a matter of seconds, and this is what happened with the Lubeck martyrs. On the 10th of November 1943, the 4 priests were one by one taken from their prison cells to their date with the executioner. One by one the priests were executed, and the executions were done in very, very quick time. It was said that all 4 men were executed by beheading on the guillotine less than 3 minutes apart from each other. So from the moment the first condemned man entered the execution chamber until when the blade fell on the neck of the 4th man, there had only been 3 minutes. This left no time for the blade to be cleaned. It was said that the blood of the 4 clergymen ran together on the guillotine and on the floor. The Lubeck martyrs were 4 priests who spoke out against the Nazi regime in the Third Reich, and they urged others to turn their back on it. But ultimately they paid a brutal price for their denunciation of Adolf Hitler and his government. All 4 of them deserved their story to be told. They would maintain in prison that they were like brothers. But it is a harrowing story of execution and people who would try to stand up for themselves against the evil regime that was the Third Reich. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.